Welcome to What Are You Mad About Today? My name is Kinda Strange, and this is a solution-oriented podcast that welcomes a variety of topics and a variety of speakers. Stay tuned to learn and definitely be prepared to feel. This is What Are You Mad About Today? Taylor Crumpton is a music, pop culture, and politics writer from Dallas. She is the arts editor at D Magazine and a proud Dallasite who believes the city has one of the best cultural art scenes in the world. Taylor has written about local music, streetwear, tattoos, and everything that shakes in the city. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, baby girl.
I'm so excited. So you're my very first guest ever.
An honor. An honor.
So excited to have you here. So let's get to it. What are you mad about today?
I am currently mad about the state of local journalism in Dallas and throughout the nation.
Can you explain why?
Of course. I know that we are all so saddened that Central Track is on a long hiatus. I think that really...
Save Central Track.
I know.
It's a little messy. Sorry to interrupt.
Listen, interruptions are all good things because we really do need to save Central Track. You know, I love Stephanie over there. That is my little editorial journalism baby. And what she did during her tenure was amazing. I mean, her Latinx song series was fantastic. And the fact that, you know, right now we don't have that voice is, I think, a real detriment to our scene. Because, you know, as someone who full-time job is local journalism, I like having a diverse range of options. You know, I compare it to my childhood favorite, Baskin Robbins. You need all 31 flavors, right? You need the old-fashioned vanilla. You need Rocky Road. You need that weird kind of like movie tied in collaboration. Like we were talking about Transformers earlier. I feel like there's an Optimus Prime flavor. Like you need all of that for like a journalism scene to be like very vibrant because our city's very vibrant, you know, and we need more publications and editors that don't only focus on one thing. So that's really what's grinding my gears today. I think that people, and rightfully so, focus on like the Complex, the Vice, the New York Times. I love those places. I still want a New York Times byline. I've written for, not Complex, I've written for Vibe. I've written for a lot of places. Too many. COVID has really destroyed my brain. I know they're over 40. But I really felt the most challenge at local publications compared to national because local always has a history to it. And you really have to understand the scene to write about a local artist. I think about a couple of years back, I interviewed Mel of the Outfit Texas for a piece about like why Dallas never got its due as a hip hop mecca. And one of his main complaints was that they would run into journalists not from Dallas and they would compare them to Houston artists. And if anybody has seen Mel of the Outfit Texas on Twitter, Instagram, or some Twitter meme, he has a Dallas shag and leather basketball shorts and is the greatest ambassador of Dallas culture that I can describe. I think he's up there with Big Tech and Erykah Badu. But just hearing from an artist like him who has given over a decade to like just Dallas in general, and then sitting down with the journalists and they don't know Dallas, so they're just comparing it to Houston, feels the type of way. You know, we wouldn't want to be compared to, you know, something that may be happening in Austin or San Antonio or Houston or El Paso. Texas is really big and all those cities have different flavors and identities. So we need more local journalists and more local outlets that can like really capture that. So you're also like not offending the artist, you know?
Do you think that like having not enough places to go for these scenes to kind of have a home in is affecting journalists wanting to cover some of the local scenes? Because I'm sure that there are people who would love to cover what's going on with fresh eyes but are not from here, and it's really hard. They're really hard to find.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like a needle in a haystack, you know. And I think about everything that's happening on like Dallas on like a weekend, And for myself, I'm like, I'm one person. And I know that there's so many areas of Dallas, like nightlife, that I'm like not able to go to or I'm not familiar with. So the thing is, for me as someone, as an editor, is how can I find somebody in that scene to write about it? Or maybe one of these days will cross over into maybe something that I'm already covering. You know, it's kind of also being a fly on the wall and trying to figure out like, okay, like who's really big in like the EDM, like after 2 a.m. scene, you know, like that exists in Dallas, and like I'm completely far removed from it, but it's like very vibrant, you know. Even in terms of nightlife, there's so many different pockets of nightlife, and I only focus primarily on one, but my focus doesn't mean that all those other areas can't get covered, you know. But a lot of times in local media, you have like one person in charge of a whole entire section, so it's like I kind of need folks in those like scenes to talk to me, to get to know me, to explain to me why their scene is so great, because I would love to give a spotlight on that. But I always tell people I'm a one-woman band.
How did you navigate from not knowing to where you are now? Because now you know so much.
Yeah, I really believe in the power of social media and like research. I started off writing because I actually was pissed off at my university, Abilene Christian University, because they made a terrible comparison saying that like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X would disapprove of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Ooh, I was actually going to ask you a question about that too, because knowing you and all the things that you've written about have mostly been about, you know, empowering Black women in particular. And then I saw the school that you went to, and I was like, whoa, what radicalized you?
Yeah, I will say that attending one of the nation's most conservative, predominantly white institutions very much woke me the fuck up. And I think doing the work that I was out there, I was a very proud student on-campus organizer, advocating for equity for Black students, students of color, student athletes in particular. A lot of our football players at the time would actually call the practice field the plantation. And I was hearing from them, and like a lot of the coverage that was coming out on that time when like Black students were organizing on campus, I think about Mizzou, is that like these Black student athletes were not being afforded the internship opportunities during the summer compared to their white counterparts. So if they didn't make it to the league, they didn't have that additional experience outside of like the gridiron to get a full-time job. You feel me? So stuff like that was coming up when I was on campus. Also, that's when I started doing a lot of like reproductive justice work, specifically in abortion rights, because at the university at the time, if you were found having sex, you could get expelled. If you were found that you were pregnant, you could get expelled. And the university was like trying to exist like those things weren't happening on campus for students, and they were happening to people who I was friends with. But I remember I wrote like one piece very, very early about how inaccessible it was to get testing on campus. Like to get tested for STDs was like $200+. And I remember being like, I'm a Pell Grant student. I don't have $200 in disposable income. Why isn't this covered by like student health plans? Like what if people aren't on their plans? So my writing first started off really as being like advocacy, like a lot of times around politics. But there was a point in time, kind of, I believe in the first year of Donald Trump's presidency, where I just really got tired and burnt out. Felt like I was always writing and critiquing white supremacy. I was always regurgitating data from think tanks about like how hard it was becoming for undocumented workers. But then it's like applying those same ideas to music. And like even in the history of journalism, like hip hop journalism, and you can say sometimes still to this day, isn't treated as being worthy as like rock journalism. Like in like music journalism, like rock journalism is like the Ivy League. Like it's treated with so much respect and tenderness and care and thoughtfulness. For like people
really
forget.
Interesting. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, there's so many hierarchies in journalism, but like, you know,
can you like state some of them?
I mean,
just like, you know, just in general.
Yeah,
where everything kind of sits.
So you have like you have your hard-hitting news, right? Like you have your news, you have like you have your CNN, you know, you have your New York Times. Those are kind of like those traditional higher standards. The New Yorker is more like cultural opinion. And then in music, you know, you have Rolling Stone, you have Spin, the ones who are like the old standbys, you know, like they are the vanguards, right? Like everything kind of came from them, kind of like when people think about Ivy League institutions. And then you kind of have like all the matriculation of like all the other places down. But when we think about music, you have to also think about the history of music and how like historically black music has not been seen as music because historically black people weren't seen as people, right? They weren't that is something very
they weren't even making music. You're not even a person.
Yeah, you're not even a person. Or like if you're making music kind of like the blues, it's the devil's music, so we really don't want to put that on air.
Yeah.
So I think people forget like all of those schools of thoughts still influence the way in which people write and critique hip hop, right? Because hip hop was seen as a fad. Like this doesn't make any sense.
I can quote you because you said something. Hold on, I'll pull it up because it was really good. Oh, hip hop emerged as a songbook for contemporary Black America.
Ah, from Big Tech. It really did. But even in hip hop journalism, like when the South came into hip hop, the coast hated us. I mean, they hate with so much vigor, and anger, and also anti-Southern bias as well, right? And that was in 2004, right? If you read hip hop literature, right, journalists who've gone on to write hip hop books, the South is not treated with enough kindness and respect for what we've actually done for hip hop culture overall, right? There are a multitude of books on the Notorious B.I.G. One of my friends, Justin Tinsley, wrote one. It's amazing. One of the 50 best music books of 2022. I'm so proud of him. I look up to him. However, even in doing the research for the Big Tuck book, Dallas was damn near invisible. I mean, not in any of these things. And when we think about journalism and when we think about literature, like these things get taught in schools and universities. So what does it mean for something that you've experienced to not exist or not be even deemed worthy of writing about, right? That's how I approach stories. Like one of these days, I mean, we're all getting older. Someone's going to be able to look back at what I did and be like, oh, this is where people went out in Oak Cliff, and it's going to be an article about Paradise. Or, oh, people were wearing these types of like socks from this local brand because they were really cool. Oh, this is what people were doing in Dallas in like 2021. Like that's my approach to journalism, which like sometimes gets me in conflict with other journalists because like we're documenting, like we're archiving in a sense, like we're historians. Yes, I'm not the biggest fan of doing the like best places to celebrate X, Y, and Z holiday. Still write them because like people still want to know where to like celebrate Mother's Day at. I love you, Mom. But when I get to do like thoughtful pieces, like I have received so many emails from high schoolers or college students or professors like, I used your article in a literature review, or I used your article in a project. You know, when I lived in Oakland, I used to guest teach at the Oakland School of Arts journalism to like middle school and high school students. Like, this is exciting, you know, and your words are always going to outlive you. And that's what really like grinds my gears about like local journalism, because if you don't have people on the scene, you could be creating some really great, valuable work. But if it's not being held somewhere, ideally from an institution, it's gonna go away. A lot of the blogs from the blog era, their work is nowhere to be found. Some of like my friends who were older journalists, like 30 plus, who wrote for a lot of these blogs that like got bought out by Complex or disappeared, their stuff is gone off of the internet.
Yeah.
You know, I think we always like, as people who love music and culture, think about like all of these secret songs that have been recorded and like no one can find them. They disappear. So I always like tell folks like all of us have a story, and sometimes you gotta like put that out there hoping that it gets somebody's attention so it can be archived.
Do you think there's a way that we can archive these things as a local thing? You know, or something that can be protected by the city? Something to look into. I don't know. Because like you're saying archive, but these archives are going to be controlled by who? Like the government. Like who has all these music, politics archives of information from certain like the actual website, right?
I mean,
like Washington Post or.
I mean, with news institutions, like they keep a record and a copy. You know, news institutions that goes to like the Library of Congress, so like that's going to be protected. But I think more about like underground stuff, right? Like, are people creating zines? Are they creating yearbooks? Are they doing something in like print? You know, like we're such a digital generation, which I love. I was a Tumblr kid. However, listen, Tumblr was a great.
They don't even know.
They don't.
They don't even
they
know.
Don't.
They're trying to replicate all these sites to be like Tumblr. You can't be like Tumblr without porn. Porn gifts.
That's true. A lot of people found their queerness on Tumblr, just randomly scrolling through.
My Tumblr on top.
It really was a nasty place. Tumblr was demon time. I remember trying to get on it during class and be like, oh my God. It'd be like 9 a.m. and I'm like in some like 101 and it's like there's Sean and Cody yet again. Sean and Cody was vigorous. But I think there's something to be said, you know. I think about all of the work people put into like parties. Like I think about like everything that it takes, the DJ, the venue, the space, the curation, the people, this and that, right? Are you doing a yearbook? Right? Are you keeping the flyers? I think about all of like the elders who like had scrapbooks, right? How valuable a scrapbook or a photo book is right now. Like you can archive stuff like that because like that's something that can be passed down. You know, it doesn't always have to be in an institution, but if you're really putting your all into this thing, there should be something, whether it's like a binder from the 99-cent store or like how we used to do back in the day in grade school, you should be keeping something. Archiving has been done orally, right? You've heard stories from your grandparents because you sat down with them. Maybe you poured them a drink. Maybe you're a little kid and they told you that, right? So, you know, for us who were in a younger generation, how can you collect those oral stories? Because they're valuable, dog. They're so valuable. Like,
I really think it's like people's lack of confidence in their own writing.
I mean, here's one thing. Writing can be taught, but your voice cannot.
Oof.
You can teach someone how to write. Listen, as an editor, part of my job is sharpening that voice. I'm like the last person who touched the plate before it goes out. I take this away. If you put too much, I take this off. I readjust everything. I am the behind the scenes person, right? I'm only here to touch up. I'm not here to overwrite. Your editor should never rewrite your whole entire piece. And if they do, y'all need to have a long conversation about it, why they rewrote that, because that's a conversation for a different time. But
but very valid, because people do try to rewrite people's voices and it doesn't come off. There's certain words,
and also
adjectives.
Like when I was younger, I had some editors rewrite me, and that really hurt me because I was like, damn, like is my voice not good enough? And then once I got to know them and build a relationship with them, they're like, I did da-da-da-da-da-da. And then I was like, oh, now I got it for next time, right? Because you want your writing reflects you, right? Like it's like how a painting reflects an artist. And sometimes you need like a jury, you know, like artists like will have juries in art school. Journalists have editors. You need someone to kind of like touch and tailor that up. So how can you collect that story from your elder and touch and tailor it up? Right. I think about, you brought up that Big Tuck book. A lot of that I had to call people. By the way, did you talk to George Lopez in real life? Yeah, I love George. The thing about the halfway books thing is I didn't think I was going to get it. And I applied last minute, last minute. Literally, I think like minutes before it was done. And I remember because when I announced it, like my thing went viral on Twitter. I think like there's some photo. I remember I announced it. It has like over 100,000 likes. Like it went viral. I ended up having a segment on WFAA. Like it escaped beyond my wildest dreams, right? And I was so happy because it showed me that so many other people had been waiting to read something like Halfway Books presents Big Tuck's Purple Hulk, right? But here's the thing about Big Tuck, which is also the thing about Dallas. If you didn't live here, like it's really hard to understand how big of a star he was into this day.
Because his song would play somewhere else, and no one's gonna go as hard as people from Dallas.
Well, here's
start a riot. Like,
here's
straight
the thing.
Up
It's
for one song.
It's our national anthem. But in doing research from that, I found people in LA who fuck with him. People in Cleveland that fuck with him. People in Memphis who fuck. Long live Young Dolph. He loved Big Tuck. He loved Dirty South Riders, right? Because what Tuck was doing was giving the story of South Dallas, but South Dallas exists in a lot of other areas, right? There are many South Dallases across the world. There are many Black communities where hustlers and gangsters are hitting the road to try to improve living conditions for their family, right? That's why Tuck was so loved by Young Dolph. That's why Tuck was so loved by Nipsey Hussle. That's why Tuck was so loved by Big Crit, because he spoke to this the shared experience that a lot of people were impacting, right? But when you look at Dallas journalism at the time, and that's why I interviewed Zach Cran, Dallas journalism wasn't covering Big Tuck because local journalism wasn't covering Fair Park, because local journalism wasn't covering South Dallas, because local journalism wasn't covering Oak Cliff, because local journalism wasn't looking at East Dallas. And when I asked Zach, I said, Zach, this isn't making sense to me, because I remember going to the 97.9 The Beat car show at Fair Park. I remember being with my mom at the Two Partners outside of Fair Park, or the McDonald's outside of Fair Park, and hearing him. I remember all these things as a little girl. So why doesn't it not exist? And he was like, Taylor, what did you expect from newsrooms of like predominantly white people from like the white areas of Dallas? And that was a common critique. Big Tuck did get written about, but it was like in very regional magazines like Ozone magazine, which was like the hip hop magazine of the South. Like he got coverage, but it wasn't locally. And when I took my job at DMAG, I said, I want to make sure no one had to go through the hell in which I went through, because there were multiple times I didn't think that book essay was going to get published, because it was like, oh, we don't exist. Like Dallas hip hop doesn't exist. You would look through all the hip hop books, it would be one sentence about the DOC and Vanilla Ice, and that was it.
Do you think that makes a big difference or impacts why you're so mad about this? Because there's so many genres, topics, insights, anything that you may not be able to cover just because your experience isn't seen.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to George, and he was like, people now tell him that Dirty South Riders and Big Tuck were before his time, because he's like, if we would have came out 2010 during the blog era, right? Big Crit blew up during the blog era. Like Young Dolph, like Memphis, Yo Gotti, like really blew up during that 2010s, right? Because here's the thing about the blog era, it took away regional borders because the internet was accessible to anyone. That's
Is it not now? Is it not the case anymore?
Well, here's the thing, it's still accessible now, but it's funny, we are seeing in hip hop this circle back to regional rap. I think about F&M by Gorilla from Memphis. That is a very Memphis X song. Like that is very Memphis. But music journalism have only covered really like Juicy J and 3 6 Mafia. But there's more to Memphis than Juicy J and 3 6 Mafia, right? They have a whole entire Memphis horrorcore movement, which was inspired by blues, which is like one of my favorite music scenes in the whole entire nation in Memphis. Memphis and Dallas are actually really alike. People compare us to Houston. We're really more similar to Memphis, but however, people focused on such one star that they didn't give credit. Every hip hop book talks about Vanilla Ice and the DOC, but even then, a lot of things are missed out from their story. Because to understand who Ice was, you would have to talk to the people who knew him and how he elevated. Right? The same thing can be applied to Tay Money, right? If people didn't realize that, like, a lot of people in the local scene, like, built her up and helped her in her career and still help her to this day, but that information isn't always put on social media or accessible to journalists to cover her.
I didn't even know about Tay Money's story until someone had to explain it to me. And it changed my perspective. It really did. So I wouldn't have known that. I mean, I like fuck with some songs, but it's not like I knew everything that was happening. But that, even as a local, I didn't know. So like you said, there's not a lot of places or people that are writing about what's actually happening. Because I live here. I live here, and I still someone had to tell me, like, years after. Like, why don't I know this?
Yeah.
It's happening literally in my backyard.
Literally. And I mean, that's the thing, like, and that's happening in so many others, like, areas of, like, Dallas arts and culture.
But I'm trying to think of ways to maybe help that.
I mean, here's the thing. It's figuring out what you can do in your capacity and what your strengths and talents are. You know, I say everybody has an individual ministry. I do not expect everyone after listening this to, like, become a journalist or a historian or a reporter or to go out and, like, that's not everyone's beat, you know?
I'm sold, though.
I think everyone can tweet.
I think, but here's the thing, like, you may be a really great photographer and maybe your contribution is taking these photos. Maybe you're really great with video. Maybe your contribution is, like, taking the videos. Maybe you were super great at styling people and you want to use these artists as, like, a canvas for what's, like, going on. Like, I think our streetwear scene is so dope and bubbling. Like, all respects to Haunts of By Way of Dallas, who, like, showed that Dallas actually has a streetwear game, because he's inspired and, like, given so many people. So it's like figuring out, like, what you're good at and how you can get around like-minded people and, like, cover that and do that. But I think, like, giving people grace is what's gonna really help, like, the arts and culture scene, and, like, figuring out, like, how you can be in community. I'm always gonna encourage community and stop infighting.
I think what would help the most too is just stop judging, y'all.
Yeah.
It's art at the end of the day. It's someone's experience. You may not understand it. Maybe you should try to. Maybe you just don't get it.
Yeah.
You know, but don't be mad at yourself for not getting it.
Don't be mad at yourself. We all gotta grow from somewhere. And you know what? A couple of years from now, you're gonna come back and, like, listen to this podcast and be like, dang, I've grown a lot since this first interview, and maybe I'll be back and it'll be wonderful, you know?
Yes, let's do that.
We're gonna do it.
Yay. Well, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you for listening to What Are You Mad About Today, a local Oak Cliff podcast that endorses the arts and new forms of thinking. Make sure to check out our new episodes on Wednesdays, my favorite day of the week. We appreciate the support. Can't exchange out. This episode is brought to you by Anchor. I really fuck with them. They make it easy for people to record, upload, and promote their podcast straight from the app. Download Anchor and create your favorite podcast today, just like I did.